Jacob Bronowski. January 18, 1908 to August 22, 1974. Aged 66. Author, scientist and television host of The Ascent of Man. He was known to friends and professional colleagues alike by the nickname Bruno. He is best known for developing a humanistic approach to science, and as the presenter and writer of the 13-part 1973 BBC television documentary series, and accompanying book, The Ascent of Man. He was widely regarded as one of the most revered intellectuals on the global stage. Bronowski's family moved from Congress Poland to Germany and then to England in 1920 while he was a child. He won a scholarship to study mathematics at the University of Cambridge. His interests have been described as ranging widely, from biology to poetry and from chess to humanism. He taught mathematics at University College Hull between 1934 and 1942. During World War II, he led the field of operations research and worked to increase the effectiveness of Allied bombing. After the war, he headed the projects division of UNESCO. Bronowski wrote poetry and had a deep affinity for William Blake. From 1950 to 1963, he worked for the National Coal Board in the UK. From 1963, he was a resident fellow of the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in San Diego, until his death in 1974 in East Hampton, New York, just a year after the airing of his Ascent of Man. Wartime work in military analysis. During the Second World War, Bronowski worked in operations research for the UK's Ministry of Home Security, where he developed mathematical approaches to bombing strategy for RAF Bomber Command. At the end of the war, Bronowski was part of a British team of scientists and civil engineers who visited Japan to document the effects of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for the purpose of studying the effects of the atomic bomb and its implications for future UK civil defence. Bronowski, in conjunction with Professor W. N. Thomas of Cardiff University, subsequently produced the secret report of the British mission to Japan. The effects of the atomic bombs dropped at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was passed to various government departments and consulted in the design of future UK public buildings. It was simultaneously published in the US. Public science education. In 1967, Bronowski delivered the 6 Silliman Memorial Lectures at Yale University and chose as his subject the role of imagination and symbolic language in the progress of scientific knowledge. Transcripts of the lectures were published posthumously in 1978 as The Origins of Knowledge and Imagination and remain in print. He first became familiar to the British public through appearances on the BBC television version of The Brains Trust in the late 1950s. The Ascent of Man, 1973, BBC television documentary. Bronowski is best remembered for this 13-part series about the history of human life and scientific endeavour. This project was commissioned by David Attenborough, then head of BBC Two, and was intended to complement 2 preceding series. Art historian Kenneth Clark's Personal View series Civilization, 1969, which had covered cultural history, and Alistair Cook's series America. A Personal History of the United States, first broadcast in 1972. The documentary was described as a landmark in television and lavishly produced and visually stunning. It impressed viewers with its lucidity and with the power of the presenter's personality. Auschwitz scene. In a personal scene filmed at Auschwitz concentration camp, where many Polish members of his family died during the Holocaust, Bronowski walks into the muddy waters where the ashes of his family were thrown, saying, "It is said that science will dehumanize people and turn them into numbers. But this was where people were turned into numbers. Into this pond were flushed the ashes of some million people. It was not done by gas. It was done by arrogance. It was done by dogma. It was done by ignorance. When people believe that they have absolute knowledge, with no test in reality, this is how they behave. This is what men do when they aspire to the knowledge of gods." Following the making of The Ascent of Man, Bronowski was interviewed on the chat show Parkinson. Host Michael Parkinson later recounted that Bronowski's description of his visit to Auschwitz was one of the most memorable parts of any interview he had done. after he had completed the last episode of his show. Parkinson stated, "If I could save one interview from the thousands I have done, it would be the one-man show with Professor Jacob Bronowski." Books. The Poet's Defense. 1939, William Blake, A Man Without a Mask. 1943, The Common Sense of Science. 1951, The Face of Violence. 1954, Science and Human Values. New York, Julian Messner Incorporated, 1965, 1956. William Blake, The Penguin Poets Series. 1958. The Western Intellectual Tradition, From Leonardo to Hegel, 1960, with Bruce Maslish. Biography of an Atom. 1963, with Millicent Selsom. Insight. 1964. The Identity of Man, Garden City, The Natural History Press. 1965, Nature and Knowledge, The Philosophy of Contemporary Science, 1969. Atomic Fusion, illustrated by Bartley Powell. Published by Newman Mean Take Home Books Ltd. William Blake and the Age of Revolution. 1972, The Ascent of Man. 1974, A Sense of the Future. 1977. Magic, Science and Civilization. 1978, The Origins of Knowledge and Imagination. 1978, The Visionary Eye, Essays in the Arts, Literature and Science, 1979, edited by Piero Ariati and Rita Bronowski.